Chapter 35. Obliteration is our hallmark. On the last day of the year, just 3 days before Winter Conclave, Scythe Goddard led one more gleaning expedition. "But we've already reached our quota for the year," Scythe Boda was quick to remind him. "I will not be constrained by a technicality," Goddard shouted. Rowan thought Goddard might actually hit Bolter, but then he took a moment to calm himself and said, "By the time we begin our gleaning run, it will already be the year of the capybara in Panacea. As far as I'm concerned, that gives us permission to count our kills as part of the new year. Then we shall return in time for our New Year's Eve gala." Scythe Goddard decided it was a day for samurai swords, although Chomsky refused to part with his flamethrower. "It's what I'm known for. Why mess with my image?" Rowan had been on 4 gleaning expeditions with Goddard so far. He found he could escape to a place within himself where he was less of an accomplice, even less than an observer. He became deleterious again, non-sentient and secondary, easily ignored and forgotten. It was the only way to keep his sanity in the midst of Goddard's blood sport. Sometimes he was so forgotten in the midst of the melee that he could help people escape. Other times he had to be at Goddard's side, loading or switching out his weapons. He didn't know what his role would be this time. If Goddard was just using his samurai blade, he didn't need Rowan to be his weapon caddy. Still, he told Rowan to bring a spare sword. Preparations for the party were already in full swing as they got ready to leave for the gleaning run that morning. The catering truck had arrived, and tables were being set up all over the grounds. The New Year's Eve gala was one of Goddard's few pre-planned parties, and the guest list was stellar. The helicopter landed on the front lawn, blowing away a tent that was being erected for the party as if it were nothing more than a napkin tumbled by the wind. "Today, we shall provide a much-needed public service," Goddard told them, with far too much glee. "Today, we dispense with some rubble," but he didn't explain what he meant. Even so, as the helicopter took off, Rowan had a sinking feeling deep in the pit of his stomach that had nothing to do with their ascent. They landed in a public park, in the center of a vacant soccer field lightly dusted with snow. There was a playground at the edge of the park where some toddlers, unfazed by the weather, climbed and sunk and dug in the sand, bundled up against the cold. The instant their parents saw Scythe stepping out of the helicopter, they gathered the children and hurried away, ignoring the children's wails of protest. "Our destination is several blocks away," Scythe Goddard told them. "I didn't want to sit down too close and ruin the element of surprise." Then he put a paternal arm around Rowan's shoulder. "Today is Rowan's inauguration," he said. "You will perform your first cleaning today." Rowan recoiled. "What? Me? I can't. I'm just an apprentice." "Proxy, my boy. Just as I allowed you to grant immunity with my ring, so will you glean someone today, and it will be tall as mine. Consider it a gift. You don't have to thank me." But that's not allowed." Goddard was unperturbed. "Then let someone complain." "Oh, what's that I hear?" "Silence." "Don't worry," Volta told Rowan. "It's what you've trained for. You'll do fine." Which is what Rowan was worried about. He didn't want to do fine. He wanted to be miserable at it. He wanted to be a failure, because only by failing would he know that he held on to a shred of his humanity. His brain felt about ready to burst out through his nose and ears. He hoped it would, because then he'd clean nobody today. "If I must do this, I will be merciful like Scythe Faraday," he told himself. "I will not enjoy it. I will not enjoy it." They came around a corner and Rowan saw their destination. Some sort of compound made to look like an old Adobe mission, completely out of place in the cold of mid-America. The iron symbol atop the tallest steeple was a 2-pronged fork. There was a stone-cooled cloister. "Nearly 100 Tonys reside behind those walls," Goddard announced. "Our goal is to glean them all." Scythe Rand grinned. Scythe Chomsky checked the settings on his weapon. Only Scythe Boda seemed to have reservations. "All of them?" Goddard shrugged as if it were nothing, as if all those lives meant nothing. "Obliteration is our hallmark," he said. "We don't always succeed, but we try." "But this? This breaks the second commandment. It clearly shows BS. Come now, Alessandro, Goddard said in his most patronizing tone. Bias against whom? Tonists are not a registered cultural group. Couldn't they be considered a religion? Rowan offered. You gotta be kidding, laughed Scythe. They're a joke. Precisely, agreed Goddard. They've made a mockery of mortal age faith. Religion is a cherished part of history, and they've turned it into a travesty. Clean them all, said Chomsky, powering up his weapon. Goddard and Rand drew their swords. Volta glanced at Rowan and said quietly, The best thing about these cleanings is that it's over quick. Then he drew his sword as well, and followed the others through a gated archway that the Tonists always left open for lost souls seeking tonal solace. They had no idea what was coming. Word spread quickly on the street that a small elite of Scythes had entered the Tonist cloister. As human nature would have it, rumor quickly raised the number to a dozen Scythes or more, and, as human nature would also have it, crowds that were slightly more excited than frightened gathered across the street wondering if they would get a glimpse of the Scythes, and perhaps even the carnage they left behind. But all they saw, for now, was a single young man, an apprentice, standing at the open gate, his back to the crowd. Rowan was ordered to remain at the gate, sword drawn to prevent anyone from trying to escape. His plan, of course, was to allow anyone to escape. But when the panicked Tonists saw him, his sword and his apprentice armband, they ran back into the compound, where they became prey for the Scythes. He stood there for 5 minutes. Then, finally he left his spot at the gate, losing himself in the maze-like compound. Only then did people begin to slip out to safety. The sounds of Angus were almost impossible to endure. Knowing he'd be expected to glean someone before this was through made it impossible for him to disappear into himself this time. The place was a labyrinth of courtyards and walkways and illogical structures. He had no idea where he was. A building was burning to his left, and one walkway was littered with the dead, marking the passage of one of the sides. A woman huddled, partially hidden by a winter bear shrub, cradling a baby, trying desperately to keep it quiet. She panicked when she saw Rowan and screamed, holding her baby closer. I'm not going to hurt you, he told her. No one's guarding the main gate. If you hurry, you'll make it out. Go, now! She didn't waste any time. She took off. Rowan could only hope she didn't run into a Scythe on the way. Then he came around the corner and saw another figure huddled against a column, chest heaving in sobs. But it wasn't one of the Tonists. It was Scythe Bolta. His sword lay on the ground, his yellow robe was splattered with blood, and blood covered his hands, shiny and sleek. When he saw Rowan, he turned away, his sobs growing heavier. Rowan knelt down to him. He clutched something in his hand, not a weapon, but something else. It's over, Volta said, his voice barely a whisper. It's over now. Clearly, however, from the sounds coming from elsewhere in the compound, it was not over at all. What happened, Alessandro? Rowan asked. Volta looked at him, then, the anguish in his eyes like that of a man already damned. I thought it was an office, or maybe a storeroom. I'd go in, there'd be a couple of people there, I'd clean them as painlessly as I could, and move on. That's what I thought, but it wasn't an office, or a storeroom, it was a classroom. He broke down in sobs again as he spoke. There had to be at least a dozen little kids in there, cowering. They were cowering from me, Rowan. But there was this one boy. He stepped forward. His teacher tried to stop him, but he stepped forward. He wasn't afraid, and he held up one of their stupid tuning forks. He held it up like it would ward me off. You won't hurt us, he said. Then he struck it against the desk to make it ring and held it up to me. By the power of the tongue, you won't hurt us, he said. And he believed it, Rowan. He believed in its power. He believed it would protect him. What did you do? Volta closed his eyes, and his words came out in a horrible squeal. I cleaned him. I cleaned them all. Then he opened his bloody hand, revealing that he held the boy's little tuning fork. It tumbled to the ground with a tiny tonal clank. What are we, Rowan? What the hell are we? It can't be what we're supposed to be. It's not. It never was. Goddard isn't a Scythe. He may have the ring, he may have the license to glean, but he's not a Scythe. He's a killer, and he has to be stopped. We can find a way to stop him, both of us. Volta shook his head and looked at the blood pooling in his palms. It's over, he said again, and then took a deep, shuddering breath and became very, very calm. It's over, and I'm glad. That's when Rowan realized that the blood on Volta's hands was not from his victims. It was from Volta's own wrists. The gashes were jagged and long. They were made with very clear intent. Alessandro, no! You don't have to do this. We have to call an ambush drone. It's not too late. But they both knew that it was. Self-cleaning is every Scythe's last prerogative. You can drop that from me, Rowan. Don't even try. His blood was everywhere now, staining the snow of the courtyard. Rowan wailed. Never had he felt so helpless. I'm sorry, Alessandro. I'm so sorry. My real name is Son Dobson. Will you call me like that, Rowan? Will you call me by my real name? Rowan could barely speak through his own tears. It's been an honor to know you, Son Dobson. He leaned on Rowan, barely able to hold up his head, his voice getting weaker. Promise me you'll be a better Scythe than I was. I promise, Son. And then maybe... But whatever he was going to say, it leaked away with the last of his life. His head came to rest on Rowan's shoulder, while all around them distant cries of agony filled the icy air. Each day, I pray as my ancestors did. They once prayed to gods that were fallible and fickle, then to one god who stood in harsh and terrifying judgment, then to a loving, forgiving god, and then, finally, to a power with no name. But to whom can the immortal pray? I have no answer to that, but still I cast my voice out into the void, hoping to reach something beyond distance and deeper than the depths of my own soul. I ask for guidance and for courage, and I beg, oh how I beg, that I never become so desensitized to the death I must deliver that it feels normal, commonplace. My greatest wish for humanity is not for peace or comfort or joy. It is that we all still die a little inside every time we witness the death of another, for only the pain of empathy will keep us human. There's no version of God that can help us if we ever lost it. From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Faraday. Chapter 36. The 13th Kill. Goddard was in the chapel sanctuary finishing the last of his terrible business. Outside the wheels began to fade as Rand and Chomsky finished what they had begun. A building was burning across the courtyard. Smoke and cold poured in through the broken stained glass windows of the chapel. Goddard stood at the front, by an altar that featured a shining two-pronged fork and a stone bowl of dirty water. There was only one Tonis left alive in the chapel. He was a balding man, wearing a frock that was slightly different from the dead around him. Goddard held him with one hand and wielded his sword in the other. Then Goddard turned to see Rowan and smiled. Rowan, just in time, he said cheerily. I've saved the curate for you. The Tonis curate saw defiance rather than fear. What you've done here today will only help our cause, he said. Martyrs testify far more effectively than the living. Martyrs to what? Goddard sneezed and tapped his blade against the huge tuning fork. To this thing, I'd laugh if I wasn't so disgusted. Rowan strode closer, ignoring the carnage around him, focusing in on Goddard. Let him go, Rowan said. Why? Do you prefer a moving target? I prefer no target. Finally, Goddard understood. He grinned, as if Rowan had just said something charming and quaint. Does our young man express a wee bit of disapproval? Bold as death, Rowan told him. Goddard's gleeful expression faded, but only a bit. He was attacked by the Tonists. They'll pay dearly for it. It wasn't them. Rowan didn't even try to hide animosity in his voice. He gleaned himself. This gave Goddard pause. The curate struggled in his grip, and Goddard slammed him against the stone basin hard enough to knock him out, then let the man fall to the ground. Volta was the weakest of us, Goddard said. I'm not entirely surprised. Once you're ordained, I will happily have you take his place. I won't do that. Goddard took a moment to gauge Rowan, to read him. It felt like a violation. Goddard was in his head, even deeper, in his soul, and Rowan didn't know how to cuss him out. I know you and Alessandro were close, but he was nothing like you, Rowan, believe me. He never had the hunger, but you do. I've seen it in your eyes. I've seen how you are when you train, living in the moment, every kill perfect. Rowan found he couldn't look away from Goddard, who had put down his sword and now held his hands out as if his were in the inviting embrace of a saber. The diamonds in his robe twinkled in the faraway firelight so bedazzling. We could have been called reapers, Goddard said, but our founders saw fit to call us scythes, because we are the weapons in mankind's immortal hand. You are a fine weapon, Rowan, sharp and precise, and when you strike, you are glorious to behold. Stop it! That's not true. You know it is. You were born for this, Rowan. Don't throw it away. The curate began to groan, beginning to regain consciousness. Goddard hauled him to his feet. Glean him, Rowan. Don't fight it. Glean him now, and enjoy it. Rowan tightened the grip on his blade as he looked into the curate's bleary, half-conscious eyes. Even as he tried to stand his ground, Rowan couldn't deny the power of the undertow. You're a monster, he shouted. The worst kind, because you don't just kill, you turn others into killers like yourself. You just lack perspective. The predator is always a monster to the prey. To the gazelle, the lion is a demon. To a mouse, the eagle is evil incarnate. He took a step closer. The curate still held tightly in his grip. Will you be the eagle or the mouse, Rowan? Will you soar or will you scurry away? For those are the only two choices today. Rowan's head was swimming. The smell of blood and the smoke pouring in through the shutter windows made him dizzy and muddled his thoughts. The curate looked no different than the strangers he practiced on every day, and for a moment he felt himself out on the lawn in the middle of a killcraft exercise. Rowan unsheathed his sword and stalked forward, feeling the hunger, living in the moment, just as Goddard had said, and allowing himself to feel that hunger was freeing in a way Rowan couldn't describe. For many months he had trained for this, and now he finally understood why Goddard always let the last one go before Rowan could strike, stopping him one blow short of completion. It was to prepare him for today. Today he would finally have that completion, and every day henceforth, when he went out to glean, he would not stay his hand or his blade or his bullet until there was no one left to glean. Before he could think it through, before his mind could tell him to stop, he launched himself toward the curate and thrust his blade forward with all of his force, finally achieving that exquisite completion. The man gasped and stumbled aside, the blade having missed him completely. Instead, Rowan's blade hit its true mark and ran Scythe Goddard through, all the way to the hilt. Rowan was close to Goddard now, inches from his face, looking into his wide, shocked eyes. I am what you made me, he told Goddard, and you're right. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that more than anything I've ever done in my life. Then, with his free hand, Rowan reached down and yanked the ring off Goddard's finger. You don't deserve to wear this. You never did. Goddard opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to deliver an eloquent death soliloquy, but Rowan didn't want to hear anything from him anymore, so he stepped back, withdrew his sword from Goddard's gut, and swung it in a broad, sweeping arc that took off Goddard's head in a single blow. It tumbled and landed in the basin of dirty water, as if that were what the basin was there for. The rest of Goddard's body fell limply to the ground, and in the silence of the moment, Rowan heard from behind him. What the hell did you do? Rowan turned and saw Chomsky standing at the entrance of the chapel, with Rowan beside him. You are so glint when he's revived. Rowan let his training take over. I am the weapon, he told himself, and in that moment he was a lethal one. Chomsky and Rand defended themselves against him, and although they were good, they were nothing compared to a weapon so sharp and precise as he. Rowan's blade cut Rand deep, but she kicked the sword out of his hand with a well-placed vocator kick. Rowan responded with an even more effective kick that broke her spine. Chomsky set Rowan's arm ablaze with the flamethrower, But Rowan rolled on the ground, putting it out, then grabbed the toning mallet from beside the altar and brought it down on Chomsky like the hammer of Thor, striking again and again and again, as if he were toning the hour, until the curate grabbed his hand to stop him and said, "That's enough, son. He's dead." Rowan dropped the mallet. Only now did he allow himself to let down his guard. "Come with me, son," the man said. "There's a place for you with us. We can hide you from the Scythe." Rowan looked at the man's outstretched hand, but even now Goddard's words came back to him. "The eagle or the mouse?" No. Rowan would not scurry away and hide. There was still more that had to be done. "Live here," he told the man. "Find the survivors, if there are any, and get out, but do it quickly." The man looked at him for a moment more, then turned and left the chapel. Once he was gone, Rowan picked up the flamethrower and got down to business. Out in the street, fire trucks had already pulled up and peace officers were holding back crowds. The entire cloister was now on fire, and although firefighters raced toward the blaze, they were intercepted by a young man stepping out of the main gate. "This is a Scythe section. You will not intervene," he said. The fire captain who now approached him had heard of Scythe-related fires, but never had such a thing happened on his watch. There was something about this that didn't seem right. Yes, the boy appeared to be wearing a Scythe's robe, a royal blue one, studded with diamonds, but the robe clearly didn't fit him. With flames consuming the compound at an alarming rate, the captain made a judgment call. This kid, whoever he was no Scythe, and was not about to hinder their efforts. "Out of the way," he told the kid dismissively. "Get back with the others and let us do our job." Then the kid moved with lightning speed. The captain felt his legs kicked out from under him. He landed on his back, and suddenly the kid was on top of him, a knee painfully pressed into the captain's chest, and a hand around his throat, squeezing so tightly it almost closed off his windpipe. Suddenly, the boy didn't seem a boy at all. He seemed a whole lot bigger, a whole lot older. "I said this is a side section, and you will not intervene, or I will clean you right here, right now." The fire captain now knew he had made a grievous mistake. No one but a Scythe could be so commanding and take such absolute control of a situation. "Yes, Your Honor," the captain rasped. "I'm sorry, Your Honor." The Scythe stood, letting the captain get up. He told his squad to fall back, and the squad, having seen the Scythe take their captain down so effectively, didn't question it. "You can protect other buildings that are threatened," the young Scythe said, "but you'll let this entire compound burn to the ground." "I understand, Your Honor." Then the Scythe held up his ring, and the captain kissed it with such force he cracked a tooth. Rowan felt his skin crawling beneath Scythe Goddard's blood-soaked robe, but as unpleasant as it was, he needed it to play the part. He was far more convincing than he thought he'd be. He frightened himself. The firefighters now directed all their attention to adjacent buildings, hosing down nearby roofs with fire retardant. Rowan found himself standing alone between the burning Tony's cloister and the crowd still held back by peace officers. He stayed until the steeple caved in and the giant fork at its apex plunged into the flames, resounding with a mournful clang as it hit the ground. "I have become the monster of monsters," he thought as he watched it all burn. "The butcher of lions, the executioner of eagles." Then, trying not to trip over the rope, Rowan strode away from the all-consuming inferno that would leave nothing behind of Scythe Goddard and his disciples but bones too charred to ever be revived.